Hey everyone, and welcome to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and I'm going to be talking about Dracula, Season 1, Episode 2. It is called Blood Vessel. So full spoilers for the episode, as always, of course. First things first. However, you probably wondered to yourself, if you watched the review of the first episode, as I wipe my dusty mic arm here, I need to give this a proper clean. But if you watch the first episode review, you'll know that I hated the first episode, and Cora pretty much hated it as well, and we had no desire in doing any more. However, one of our regular viewers, during one of the live streams, tipped a relatively high amount to get me to watch and review this episode. One of the tip options is to do a TV episode review, and they did. So, I am here under duress to talk about Dracula episode 2. So, this episode features Dracula's voyage to England on the ship, and funnily enough, one of the things that I said back when we first heard news about them doing a Dracula show like this and hoping to devote enough time to each part of the book, I was very much excited about the idea of spending a lot more time on the ship, and the idea that could be a whole episode. Mainly because I think that chapter in the book is very good from what I remember. Now, I hated the first episode, and there was a lot of comments that disagreed with my appraisal of the first episode. And this one's not as bad. It's not, I think a lot of my problems persist in that I don't really like the actor playing Dracula. I don't like his attitude or his kind of smarminess. I don't like the direction. It's a little over the top. It's far too quickly paced for me, and as a result, I don't feel the slow build or dread that I want from Dracula adaptation, which, for the record, most adaptations don't succeed in doing. Some are better than others. I don't believe we've yet had the great adaptation of the story yet. Even though I enjoyed the 1931 Bela Lugosi one. I enjoyed the Hammer one when I saw it. But I'm not a fan of the Coppola one from the 90s. I have a lot of problems with that one, from memory at least. So, the first episode was a rough time, and I think this one was an easier viewing than that one was. It's a bit more focused because it's all on the ship. It's told in a more straightforward fashion, which I think is to its benefit. It does still have kind of a sort of storytelling narrative bookend for the first half of the episode, much like the first one did, where Agatha Van Helsing, is playing chess with Dracula, and he's explaining his boat trip. He's telling the story, so we're still kind of continuing the idea of retelling the story to someone else as a narrative device. Although the twist halfway through the episode is that she's actually on the ship, and this is kind of in her head while she's on the ship, and then she wakes up and kind of becomes part of the story, and from there it's just kind of straightforward. And I mean, I appreciate the idea of having a consistent narrative style. Like, I'm okay with that as a concept. I think it's a little bit strange for me for Dracula to be the one telling the story, and again, this is mainly just because of how it is in the book. Like, it's never told from Dracula's perspective because he's this mysterious figure. One of my problems with Dracula being kind of the main character of Dracula is that he's too, he should be more mysterious in this. He should be more kind of like, we should be questioning things more. We should be trying to understand things more. So, what I will say about this episode, though, is that it does kind of stick to some of the rules that it set up in the first one. There's a couple of new things it's added. Now, don't get me wrong, I remember in the book them talking about the fog constantly being around the ship, and it's as if it followed the ship. And I like that a lot in the book, and I like that concept, but I never really thought of it as literally Dracula blowing fog out of his mouth. That scene in this was pretty stupid, I thought. It's one of those things where you visually just do it like that, and it takes it robs it of all the mystery, of all the intrigue. It's a silly special effect of fog coming out of his mouth. But the core idea of the fog kind of like following the ship, because it's kind of ethereal, it's kind of like, it's almost like the bad weather's attracted to Dracula. At least that's how I sort of took it in the book. Not that it has to be exactly that, but I kind of like that it's vague. It's kind of up to us what it is. But I do appreciate that it sticks to its rules about the pages of the Bible making the line that you can't cross, and they even suspect that someone in the circle is a an imposter. It's actually Dracula because he entered the circle before it was complete, and then they test it by having him step outside the circle, and then you're sort of thinking, has this younger guy become, is this actually Dracula? And he isn't, but it plays the suspense well enough in the scene based on its own rules, and I think that's why that scene works fairly well, is because instead of sort of, as far as I'm concerned, rushing through other things that I think should take more time, this actually spends some time really relishing in playing with the idea that it set up last episode. So the payoff of whether or not it will, be Dracula or not actually makes a lot of sense here, and it feels earned, I think, is my thing. Whereas a lot of other things in this show I don't think feel earned very much. Almost every time there's a close-up of Dracula going, with his fangs out, I kind of chuckle to myself because it feels kind of cheesy to me. And what's funny is a lot of the comments of the first one either suggested or accused of just wanting the same thing again and not wanting a new interpretation. But my problem with the cheesiness of it is that it's not new to me. I feel like I've seen bad versions of Dracula that sort of rely on the same gimmicks. So that's kind of my thing. I want new, and I want a good, slow, broody version of Dracula, which I don't believe we've ever really had to the extent that I want. I want Dracula with the pacing in Tone of the Witch. That's the Dracula I want, baby. But yeah, so so this episode we're introduced to a bunch of characters who are on the ship. We have a sort of rich guy and his new wife and his servant, who everyone sort of refers to as his servant, who's a black man, so they all assume that he owns him, but they're actually gay lovers. It's heavily implied throughout the episode, and the marriage is kind of one of, a presentation. It's a facade for the public image. And we have this younger guy who's never been on a ship before, who's actually faked his way on by pretending to be someone else that he saw die in the hospital. And then we have, the captain, we have the doctor, we have a bunch of, characters that to the episode's credit, it does a good job of letting us sort of get to know a bunch of these characters, to the point where when we get down to the last half dozen, it felt like a proper sort of movie where, okay, we've learned enough about these characters that we know who these characters are, and we understand who's left. It's not just a bunch of red shirts at this point. We understand the stakes and who's left, and it feels like a proper kind of survival movie at that point. So when I say episode 2 is better, because I think the fundamentals of just trying to survive on the ship, I think the second half's definitely better than the first half. Because it drops the because at that point it becomes more about following Agatha Van Helsing and her trying to direct the remaining survivors and the remaining crew to fight back, and that becomes proactive, which I really like in horror stories. And it drops the Dracula as the main protagonist, as the one who's actually kind of driving the story, which I'm not saying you can never have a story where the vampire or Dracula is the one driving the story. Many of the vampire movies I like have vampire lead characters. It's more that, at least in this context, and certainly in the context of the book Dracula, Dracula works better as the force that we were watching people defend against. And because Van Helsing's built up a bit of cred from the first episode, and because they spend enough time with some of these characters that they're likeable enough, it's one of those things where it could actually be longer, believe it or not. And I can't believe I'm saying that, but if you had a bit more time to let the tension breathe a little bit more and actually let us get to know the characters more, then I think it'd be even more effective. But at the very least, I think once it drops the the conversation in the dream and Van Helsing's awake and she convinces them that there's a vampire, because they're going to hang her, and then she says she's a vampire, and she does this to stall until she can bite her own lip to make Dracula react to the blood, and that's when it kind of convinces everyone else that he indeed is the vampire and the killer, because people start dropping left and right very quickly. And I always like that tone in the book, in that chapter, that it's the captain's journal, and he's talking about people disappearing and no one knows why, and everyone's kind of freaking out. This obviously goes more bombastic with it, the ship's in flames and going down by the end of it, and all the rest of it. Maybe the ship burned in the book, I can't remember, but it definitely arrived, because I remember least I think it did. Because, well, defined the journal at the very least, I'm sure. It's been a while. I read it in high school, okay? It's been a while. But, so, that stuff's okay. There's a couple of sections, though, that I don't necessarily like that much. A couple of the early victims aren't that interesting. There's a whole 5 minutes or so spent on this older woman who met Dracula as a young woman and eventually recognizes him, and he kills her. Like, honestly, that entire 5 minute section I could have happily cut. It felt like it was kind of relishing in Dracula being suave and just going around doing what he wants. And for me, it got more interesting when it was about surviving. It was about, okay, how can we try and kill him? How can we trap him? Let's get rid of all of his boxes of earth that he needs to sleep in, except one, so that if he goes to sleep, we can kill him. And of course, there's the twist that he has every bed in the ship has his soil underneath it, so that he can sleep in any bed. So there's that, and there's a lot of like fake outs. Obviously, they eventually kind of beat him. They burn him. They pin him down after a few deaths. That's the other thing, though. The one thing this does not have over the first episode is the first episode had those 2 or 3 moments of really extreme gore. This episode doesn't have that. I mean, he bites a bunch of people, and we see blood kind of, squirting from the necks a little bit, but nothing on the level of the decapitation or the coming out of the wolf or any of that stuff. There's nothing to that extent in this one. But that's okay if it's overall much better. And I don't want to go say much better, because it still has a lot of the faults that I have with it. It still has that lack of presence that I kind of want from it. But this is a far more... what's the word I'm looking for? Far more... It's better constructed, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I don't want to say it's far more coherent, because the first episode was coherent. It was just a bit all over the place and had so much going on. This one, because it is confined to the one location, it's almost kind of forced to be a bit more straightforward, and it's to its benefit. It's one of the things that I hate about Sherlock and the final season of that, is just how complex it had to go. It was like, can't you just tell a story from beginning, middle, and end, and just go through it? So they burn him. They think he's dead. They're on the way back to or to England, and they're almost there. And Agatha's like, no, we have to burn the ship. Anything with vampires. And technically, I'm part vampire now, because I'm not quite a vampire, but I'm undead, much like Harker was in the first episode. And she's going to stay back with the ship and let everyone go in the lifeboat. But the captain stays by. Moment of camaraderie between them. But then she figures out the soil's under the bed, and Dracula's bit the captain, thinking he's dead, but he's not, and he says to Agatha, keep him talking. So he's going to, blow the ship, the hull, so that the ship will go down while she keeps Dracula talking. And actually, that reminds me, there's another I don't drink wine moment. They're making this a thing, and I don't know why. This like, I didn't have as many eye-rolling moments in this episode, but Jesus, this moment annoyed me. So it's when they're in her head playing chess, and he takes a drink out of a glass, and she goes, "You don't drink," and he immediately goes, "Wine," and I thought, like, it's not funny. It's not funny. I hate his delivery of it. It's just like, there's a way he could do it if he paused a bit more and then went, "Wine," or I don't know, like, not like that, but like, I don't know, like, his delivery of it just does nothing for me. It's just so quick. There's just no emphasis on it. Like, if you're going to treat it like a sort of dumb joke, then make it a dumb joke. It felt like we're doing it again. Like, we get it, okay? He says he doesn't drink wine. It's a classic Dracula line. We're aware. We've figured it out. And speaking of the conversations, there's a lot of references again to him, like, feeding on people, and the idea that he even, like, takes on traits that he doesn't want, and if he eats people in the wrong order on the ship, by the time he gets to England, he'll have the attitude of a Russian sailor. Which, by the way, there was a lot of speaking Russian at the start of this episode with subtitles, and that's fine. Great. But for some reason, they just stopped speaking Russian at one point. And I get it when they're speaking to the characters who don't speak Russian, but there is legitimately a point where all the Russian characters on the ship, fairly early on, just start speaking in English to each other, and there's, like, no reason for it. It's really weird. I don't know. Very odd. Uh, the young guy who pretends to be someone else to get on the ship, like, okay, he's kind of there to, like, sort of bond with the cook who's got the hook for the hand, and they're kind of pleasant with each other. So we, it's kind of there to make us care about them. So there's some characters to actually have some stakes later on, and that's fine. I did think it was a little bit weird that his past in any way never really comes. I mean, he does obviously admit that he's got a real name at the end, but it's never like a question. Like, what I thought they were going to do with it is I thought they were going to use the fact that he lied about who he was to paint him as a suspect at some point. And it would be kind of not a red herring for us because we would know, but it's something plausible for the other characters to kind of blame him and say, hey, you. Another thing I have to mention is the fact that the sort of the douchebag rich guy who has the fake wife, well, she gets killed early on, and then he sides with Dracula because we realize eventually that Dracula under an alias has actually lured many of these passengers onto the ship, so he's got a variety of people on there, and once they know he's a vampire, this guy actually sides with Dracula and helps him by taking care of the curtains at one point so there's no sunlight, and holding up the doctor at gunpoint and threatening to shoot his daughter if he doesn't lower the cross that he's made. So super dark stuff, and he ends up even shooting the doctor when the struggle happens after his daughter commits suicide by drinking something. I think we catch what it was, but it's a whole thing. This idea that he thinks he's going to be like, the Dracula's chosen him to be a partner because maybe he likes him more or something, and that's not true at all. Dracula feeds on him. It goes down pretty quickly. And from there, this is where everyone's on the deck, and they're all kind of like forming the circle and really starting to like plan things out and whatnot. The scene's okay. Like, it makes sense that some sleazeball tries to side himself with Dracula, someone who thinks they can kind of smoozy up to the Dark Prince and get their fortune or get their whatever they want in life. So it does enough to give us a diverse set of characters throughout the episode, and there's nothing anywhere near as bad as the Harker getting lost in the castle. That stuff in episode 1 absolutely pissed me off. There's nothing like that in this episode. It's much more serviceable, and it was much less annoying. The only real problems in this episode are just, again, the directing style feeling a bit too quick for me and a bit too in your face, and the attitude, the way he's written, but also the performance of Dracula not being to my taste either. This episode is objectively just not as bad as the first one, and I do think the first one is really bad. So the big ending of the episode, though, and I actually I knew that there was going to be a time jump. I just, someone in the comments had mentioned there was a time jump for the third episode. So when the ship goes down and Dracula like sneaks into his box of earth before it goes out the ship, and he's under the water, we see him break out of his box, and he's walking along the seabed, and he gets to the shore. Because I knew there was going to be a time jump, I said, well, that's what the time jump was. He was in the box for however many years till present day. And sure enough, there's a helicopter, and then all these cars show up expecting him. They've been waiting for him, and the actress who plays Agatha Van Helsing is there, the head of these this police force of whatever they are, and asks what took him so long. And whether this is actually meant to be the same character or a descendant, we'll find out, I guess. Because she was kind of undead, it's entirely possible it is her still, and she's been kind of like stuck around. Waiting for Dracula so she can fight him. Otherwise, it's a descendant, which is fine. Although, actually, would that be fine? Well, I guess she had to survive either way. She had to survive and go to shore to have a descendant, unless she already had a kid. But given she was a nun, that seems unlikely. So she either gave up being a nun and had a kid, but she's undead, so maybe she can't have kids. So maybe it has to be her. Maybe it's just her, undead her. Okay, I've talked myself out of it. It's her. It's definitely her. or not. If you watch the third episode, you'll know, and I don't, and that's fine. So that's the end of the episode. That's the big to be continued, which is fine. Worth mentioning as well, actually, going to the last cliffhanger. So they use the fact that we don't really get a proper conclusion to that as part of the twist in this episode. That that Van Helsing was brought with him onto the ship. Remember what happened. So it's kind of mentioned, but when he's explaining that he kissed her and sort of hypnotized her onto the ship and drank some of her blood, that he let Mina go. He let Mina run away. So I presume that Mina will have a descendant, maybe played by the same actress or something in the present day section. Because of that, would be my guess. Maybe she married a Reinfeld. Maybe because Harker was dead. I don't know. That's my... Because I assumed she was dead at the end of the last episode. I assumed they were just changing that up, especially when I found out it was a time jump. But given that it's made a point of him letting her go, I assume there'll be some sort of follow-up to that in episode 3. Otherwise, is there much else I want to talk about? I mean, not particularly. There's a whole thing, building up to the reveal of Helsing being on the ship. We know there's a sick person behind door number 9, and everyone's kind of speculating. And when the murders start happening, like, oh, maybe something's hidden in there. I was not expecting Dracula to try and frame her, which was kind of weird, because as a couple of them rightly point out, she is very weak and can barely move. How is she the one committing all these murders? It makes no goddamn sense. Luckily, she, like I said earlier, she's able to convince them that Dracula's a vampire, and that's where the rest of the plot goes. So it's okay, and I think this one is a lot more passable. The first episode, I'd have given that like a 3 out of 10. I thought the first episode was a complete disaster. This episode is a very kind of serviceable, solid 6 out of 10. It's not great, and I think a lot of it could be improved, but I think the core mechanics of what it's doing, for the most part, works. I mean, the whole like in the head twist and like all that stuff in the first half, I would probably get rid of all that. I'd spend more time just devoting to the mood, slow build to some of the stuff, spend less time with Dracula himself early on. Like have him still come and speak to people, don't get me wrong, but not have him constantly talking to Van Helsing would be a big help, and then not having him kind of almost feels like he's winking at the camera at some points, and I don't like that. If we're going for a genuine horror take on Dracula, I don't think this is it. It's just a little bit too camp for it to be that for me. But better than the first one. I give it that. It was better than the first one. It was more watchable. That said, though, I didn't love it, and because I didn't love it, 90 minutes did feel like it took a bit long. And I know I said that it should get more time for some things, and I stand by that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the 90 minutes didn't feel like a long time for a TV episode, watching it as it was, because it did. But hey ho, that is Dracula episode 2. Hopefully, you enjoyed my thoughts on it. Be kind in the comments and let me know what you thought of this episode 2. No plans to review episode 3, so unless someone else buys it, it's not happening. But that is me. So let me know in the comments what you thought of the episode. Like and subscribe, ding the bell for YouTube notifications. If you want to support the show and everything we do, you can over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, and you can do that for as little as $1 per month and keep all the content coming. Or you can tip during the live streams, which happen occasionally on YouTube via super chats or via direct donations in the PayPal link. But which is how this thing happened. That's how this review happened. But that is me, so thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV, guys. Have you got any vanilla?